What's going on, Wolfpack? Welcome back. Welcome, Bike. Welcome to another episode of Market Watch Mondays. Man, it seems like it's been forever since I've done a solo show. I've had some really incredible guests. If you guys have missed it, we got FFB Victoria on last week. We had Jordan McNamara on the week before that. So a lot of good tidbits and info in there. Go back and check those out if you haven't already. But I got to say, man, it feels good to be back in the studio solo, because that's how I started the show, right? I started the show just spitting strategy and talking shit on this channel, and hopefully giving some interesting nuggets for those of you guys out there that are listening to learn and apply to your own dynasty approach and become a dominant force in your home leagues. And based on what I'm seeing in the Patreon, man, people are dominating these drafts, and I love to see it. They're trading back, they're using those philosophies, they're accumulating rookie picks, and still building really, really nice rosters that are probably going to be dominating their leagues and creating a lot of orphans for years to come. But it's good to be back, and I got some stuff this week. I think a lot of people have asked me to talk about a couple of topics, so that's why I think it was a good time to do a solo show so I can kind of cover that. But before we get into anything, man, we're gonna have to hit the intro. Like I said, always, I'm Mike Me Up with 2Ps on Twitter. If you want to get on there, holler at me and I'll get back to you. But we're going to the episode now, and it's time to hit that intro. All right, so for those of you out there who are in the Patreon, again, thank you. For those of you who aren't and are thinking about it, trust me, I think it'll be worth your money. Hop on in there, patreon.com/ourpack. We're at 300 members strong now, constantly talking strategy. Some other Patreon members are building tools on top of my ranks, so that's like where you'll be able to get all of my tiered ranks and all that stuff. And they've basically built I would call it like a modified a Google Sheets trade calculator almost, to help you gauge values on players using my ranks, which is actually super cool. So a lot of cool stuff happening in there. It's not infomercial, just saying, if you guys are interested, if you want to get in on Dynasty and become a hardcore Dynasty gamer, hop in the Patreon. I promise you this, you will not fucking regret it. It will be the best money you ever spent in fantasy to help you get the W. All right, so this week I want to cover a couple of topics. The first topic I wanted to go over was best ball strategy. All right, so this is mostly a dynasty focused channel, but it's okay to talk about redraft every once in a while. If you're like me, you're spending probably some of your downtime just flicking through underdogs and going through best ball drafts. I always have 40, 50 drafts active at a time. One, because it helps me stay on top of ADP trends and understand that stuff for small dollars. You spend a few $100 or whatever, and you can kind of do ADP for the entire off season. But two, it's just fun. It's just fun passing the time. And then three, it makes me money. I make money on best ball just like I do in playing Dynasty. Best ball, especially on underdogs, has been my best ROI out of across all the best ball platforms out there, which is kind of weird because I think underdogs is a bit sharper in terms of the field and the people they are playing on. They're much more quick to react to news and ADP than say DraftKings, which is a very, very soft field. But for whatever reason, I outperform my underdogs compared to others. I have a working theory. I think it's because it's kind of like poker. I don't really know how to play against really wonky players, but if I know someone's a GTO player that plays theory, then I kind of know what to do against them. So it's the same thing on underdogs. Most people there are pretty rational drafters, so knowing that, I can kind of build my rosters as is, right? So there's a couple of different things that go into best ball, and you can play best ball Dynasty too. I haven't done any. Maybe I'll take some on, but the concepts kind of still apply. But in best ball, you hear people say all the time, right? You gotta chase upside. But what does that actually mean in terms of actually applying it in theory? And what it means to me for best ball is when you're drafting players, you're not as concerned about the floor of a player once you get into those middling to later rounds, right? Because you're chasing for guys that can get into your lineup, that can score enough to get into your flex or get into your lineup on the boom weeks. So this is where I feel wide receiver or zero RB and modified zero RB, whatever the fuck you want to call it, hero RB, which is my favorite, really comes into play because you're no longer making lineup decisions. So the fact that wide receivers are boom bust in nature, that's actually playing to your advantage because you want those high weeks. You want the Mike Evans 40-point burgers. You want the Tyler Lockett 40-point burgers in your week, and you don't care as much about those duds that they put up because in those weeks they're putting up duds, hopefully you have accumulated enough wide receivers enough talent at the wide receiver position to kind of fill in for that. So in best ball drafts, I tend to go like modified 0 RB or 0 RB a lot. So and when how I make the decision really just comes down to like draft position. If I'm drafting from like the top part of the draft, like top 4 picks, top 5 picks, and I know I'm going to be able to get a shot at a workhorse running back, I'm going to take them like 10 times out of 10, right? But if I'm drafting from the back part of the draft and I'm deciding between guys like maybe like a Cam Akers and like a Stephon Diggs and stuff like that, I'm probably going to go wide receiver with Stephon Diggs and Tyreek Hill and go 0 RB. So, it really just depends on your draft strategy, but at the end of the day, you're trying to remain fluid. So, but as a general arc, that's usually what I'm trying to do. And, the second thing that people always talk about is the running back dead zone, right? And what is that? And I think, Jacob, I don't know his last name, but at FFRTDB, he put out a really cool thread today talking about the RB dead zone, what it is and how it applies. But typically speaking, the RB dead zone is basically from rounds 3 to 6. And the reason why it's called the RB dead zone is because if you look historically, wide receivers outscore running backs in that ADP range by a wide margin. And that's why the modified or the hero RB drafting format works, because if you get that workhorse running back, that bell cow, and then you just smash a bunch of wide receivers in that zone, you're going to outscore your opponents who are drafting the running backs in that zone. And historically speaking, the running backs in that zone, the reason why it's a dead zone is because they're usually past the age apex, they're past the production apex, and they're not really bell cows, so they don't have any upside on the receiving end. They're usually like, first and second down grinders that are very, very TD dependent, right? And if you look back historically, those guys are not the guys that are going to put up enough points for you on a weekly basis to matter in best ball. But you gotta actually take and I think what Jacob did a really good job of is like not just take the approach like, oh, if a running back is in this ADP, you shouldn't draft them. It's more about trying to analyze like what running backs are in that ADP and do they share those same qualities. So he had the list here, and I'll pull up on the screen if the editor would be so kind. But the running backs currently going round 3 to 6, according to Jacob, is DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins, Chris Carson, Miles Sanders, David Montgomery, Josh Jacobs, Mike Davis, Travis Etienne, Myles Gaskin, Kareem Hunt, Javonte Williams, and Chase Edmonds. If you compare this to like lists of like years past, what you're looking at is like Melvin Gordon, right? Like Leonard Fournette and like those types of guys. And it's a very different profile if you're looking at DeAndre Swift, right? And it's almost like, well, DeAndre Swift is in a running back dead zone. Like, should we not draft him? Like, no, that's stupid, because DeAndre Swift was going in the second round before, a couple of weeks ago. And the fact that he dropped a little bit in value doesn't make him any worse player. It just means that people reacted to Jamal Williams news or whatever news they wanted to react to. But the situation has largely been unchanged. So DeAndre Swift is a great target in the third round. You have to take him at the top of the third. So again, it comes back to your draft position and where you're drafting from, because he's not going to make it to the later end of the third round. So the running back dead zone, the way I think about it is this: like I'm not really fading running backs there because I think like, oh, because a running back is drafted from 3 to 6, I think they suck. The reason why I don't end up drafting many running backs in that zone is because I like to go the running back early, and I like the wide receivers there more, because frankly speaking, there's a ton of wide receiver value in those rounds. My favorite targets so far this year: DK Metcalf in the third round, Tyler Lockett in the fourth is an absolute fucking crime. And getting both of them is really good, and I'll speak to that later because that helps you complete a stack. And a stack, from my eyes, in best ball, most people think about stacks as just like quarterback plus wide receiver. To me, that's not a stack, because you're not really fully capitalizing on the upside of a team's offense and hitting the boom week with just one receiver and one quarterback. You want to get multiple receivers and a quarterback. So I'm trying to stack 2 receivers or a pass-catching running back plus a receiver, or like receiver plus tight end, like those types of things. 2 or more pass catchers plus a quarterback. That to me is a stack. And I'll talk about some of the stacks I think are very, very affordable in best ball right now later on. But for now, just really understand the running back dead zone, and don't just fade a player just because they're in that dead zone without actually thinking about it. So I will link Jacob's Twitter thread in my video below. Great follow on Twitter as well, so make sure you follow him and just sort through. I'm not going to repeat everything he said because I think he did a pretty good job of summarizing it, right? So the other thing I want to talk about is like roster construction, right? People always have like different roster builds, and roster construction is pretty damn important in my eyes for best ball. And the way I approach it is this: like I said, if I'm picking from early on in the draft, I'm going running back, right? Because you have to assume that your running backs are going to be healthy. You cannot play for safety in best ball. If you want to do that for season long, fine. I don't do that in season long either. But especially in best ball, where you're looking for the boom, you cannot be looking to limit your downside. So you can't draft Dalvin Cook and then try and protect him with an Alexander Madison. You can't draft an Ezekiel Elliott and try and protect him with a Tony Pollard to try and secure the backfield. That does not matter. You have to go in with the base assumption that your first round picks, your first round running backs are healthy and going to play the season. If they go down, you're fucked anyways. You're not going to win anything. So it doesn't matter. That team is dead. So you cannot go in playing scared. All right. So for me, I go in assuming that whoever I take in the top part is going to be healthy. And the teams that are healthy and play out are going to be the winners. And if they get injured, then those best ball teams are dead anyway. So it doesn't really matter, right? So when I go pick a CMC or I go pick a Barkley or a Dalvin Cook, my assumption is that's going to be my anchor running back every single week, right? Or my hero running back, so to speak. And then from there, what I really like to do this year is to just get a tight end, because tight ends, there's two different approaches. And when I'm approaching best ball with tight ends, I have two different approaches. I either land a stud, and if I land a stud like a Darren Waller, a George Kittle, probably not as much Travis Kelce because he's going in the first round, so I only pick him in 0 RB drafts where I'm picking from late part of the draft. But if I get a George Kittle and Darren Waller, which is usually when I start picking from the top part of the draft, I'm like a top 4 or 5 pick. When they come back to me in the second round, they're usually there, so I'm grabbing a Darren Waller or George Kittle. And when I do that, that helps my roster construction because it means I only need one other tight end for like bye weeks. There's no point in drafting 3 tight ends if you have a stud tight end, because the assumption is that tight end one is going to stay healthy, and the chances of these shitty tight ends outproducing them on a week-to-week basis is very low. So you'd rather allocate that portion to the wide receivers, because you're starting in Underdog's best ball, you're starting 3 wide receivers and 2 running backs and a flex, I believe. Sorry, don't quote me if I'm wrong. I'll double check that later, but it's definitely 3 wide receivers, I'm pretty sure. So you need to have as many wide receivers as possible so that you get all those boom weeks and they kind of like average out with the duds. All right. So allocating, 3. Some people like to allocate 3 to tight end and 3 to quarterback. For me, I'm trying to minimize as much investment in the quarterback and tight end position as possible, because you only need to start one of them. All right. So if you land Waller or Kittle, do not draft another tight end unless it's like incredible value in the middle rounds. But I usually don't draft one until like the double-digit teens or the mid double digits, and I'll talk about some of those targets. But that's why I do it. So hopefully I can land a stud tight end. And in the recent drafts, I have been able to do it a lot more often than not. If you'd miss on a tight end though, let's say you went 0 RB and you decide to go like Stephon Diggs and like DeAndre Hopkins from the back end, right, in the top 2 rounds, you're not going to get Kittle or Waller in the third. It's not happening, right? So then what I do is I basically fade the entire middle rounds of tight end unless I can get TJ Hawkinson at value, but he's been creeping up there in ADP as well. And then I just basically fire like 3 darts in the late rounds and hope that like the luck into TDs and whatever is enough to get me throughout the season to basically be carried by my strength at the other positions. But I haven't been doing that as much. I've mostly been trying to anchor one really, really good tight end, because tight end is a freaking shit show. And all these late round tight ends, like, I mean, most of them just don't work out. But in terms of my targets for late round tight ends, I think Gerald Everett is one of the best values at tight end, because he's with freaking Russell Wilson, and Russell Wilson fed Jimmy Graham like double-digit touchdown seasons, even when he was like pretty much washed. And Gerald Everett's going in the mid-teens, or sorry, maybe like 14th, 15th round in Underdog's ADP. Cole Kmet, again, just a lot of opportunity for him to kind of step up there. He was getting a decent amount of targets. He hasn't been the most efficient. He's not the greatest prospect ever, but I mean, I think the volume there can be pretty tantalizing. And then Rob Gronkowski, very high scoring offense, favorite of Tom Brady's. Again, you're not looking for studs here. You're just looking for guys that can kind of string together a bunch of weeks. And if in weeks that I don't get Rob Gronkowski, I've been targeting OJ Howard, who's been dirt cheap, like 17th round cheap, right? And I'll just like pair together some combo of that, and then I'll mix in some Jonnu Smith in there, and I think I've also mixed in like some Austin Hooper in there. Again, not sexy names at all, but just feel like they are very cheap, and there are a couple of names that you can kind of like stack with some other offensive pieces, which we can talk about later. So tight end strategy, there's only two methods, right? It's either go stud with 2 or just fire a bunch of darts. The worst thing you can do is to try and get 3 tight ends in like those middle rounds. That is a complete and utter waste of draft capital. So don't do that. And then quarterbacks. So quarterbacks, single quarterback leagues, redraft leagues, I mean, it's been drilled in everyone's heads now. Like, you have to go late round quarterback. It's the way to go. And to me, I don't really like doing that as much because they're just, I think that it's been pushed to a point where you can get really, really good quarterbacks and anchor quarterbacks that can basically carry your team and build really, really nice stacks in best ball. And then that will allow you to only invest 2 picks into the quarterback position versus 3. Because if you go late round quarterback, it's very similar to tight end. You're going to have to fire on like 3 of them. So you're going to need to dedicate 3 roster spots. Whereas if you grab someone early, and when I say early, I don't mean like Patrick Mahomes early, right? I'm talking like in the 6th round. So in the 6th round right now, late 6th to early 7th, you can probably land one of Russell Wilson or Justin Herbert. And these are 2 of my favorite targets. Justin Herbert obviously balled out last year. Russell Wilson balls out every single year. But they're going in the late 6th round. And at that point, you're choosing between like a Russell Wilson and like maybe like a Jerry Jeudy or whatever. And the Russell Wilson, I think Justin Herbert, they add way more advantage to your team. And also, like I said, clears out one of those roster spots for you. So those have been my 2 favorite targets, not just because they're really good, but also because you can use them to form some pretty interesting stacks, specifically Russell Wilson. So in best ball, you want to get stacks because you want to get hit on those boom weeks when that entire offense like just goes off. That's going to add to your points on a weekly basis, right? You don't like that type of exposure. You want high leverage exposure to offenses in best ball because there's like you don't have to make lineup decisions, right? You're just trying to hit the booms to get as much scoring as possible. So in that respect, the stack of the Seattle stack is probably one of my favorite and most affordable at value stacks you can get in best ball. You can get DK Metcalf in the 3rd round when you're picking from the top part of the 3rd. So let's say you go like CMC, Darren Waller, DK Metcalf. Those can be your first 3 picks. And then your 4th round pick usually can be Tyler Lockett, right? So maybe not from CMC. Maybe if you're picking like 1.04, you can go like Barkley, Waller, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. I've done that stack like a million times. All right. So that gets you the start of the stack. And then, like I said, one of my favorite late round target tight ends is Gerald Everett, who I think is in store and has the potential to score double-digit touchdowns, which is really all you need from tight ends to hit the boom, especially for supporting like a Waller, for example. That's really all you need for tight ends that aren't elite to like kind of get you by. It's not going to be sexy, like I said. It's not like he's going out there scoring you 20 points, but, a touchdown, a few catches gets you like, 12, 13, 14 points, and that's more than enough to be like a top 5 tight end for that week. So that's why I really, really like Russell Wilson as a quarterback, because he allows you to get a really, really affordable stack. And then similarly, Justin Herbert can also get you like a pretty interesting stack, right? So you can get Justin Herbert, very similar to Russell Wilson. They're going like basically back to back. Justin Herbert has a slightly higher ADP by like a couple picks, but they're going back to back in terms of QB rankings. So you can get them kind of in that tail end of the 6th, and sometimes you're lucky the opening of the 7th. And the reason why I like him is because you can get Keenan Allen in the 3rd, and Keenan Allen as your first wide receiver off the board is more than enough. Like he's an absolute stud. Obviously, very, very underrated. All right. And then sometimes if you can mix in like an Austin Eckler if you're picking more from like the back part of the 1st. His ADP's been creeping up as well. But even if you don't get him, you can get someone cheap like a Jalen Guyton way as like your last round pick. And like again, like this guy's not going to be in your lineup that often, but for an 18th round pick, he can have a couple boom weeks, a couple long touchdowns to kind of be in your lineup. And then also Jared Cook as a potential late round tight end target, someone who can score a lot of touchdowns in that offense can also be there. And then Mike Williams, again, very, very cheap. So again, the quarterback selection there for me really comes down to 1, is the quarterback really good? But 2, can I form a high upside best ball stack with them? So that's why Justin Herbert and Russell Wilson are 2 of my favorites, because they're going at a very, very affordable price in the 6th round, and they have very good offensive players that you can stack with them for that upside. So that's what I mean when it comes down to stacks. Now, if you don't go early QB, or if you just want to supplement, Tannehill and Russell Wilson, someone I've been supplementing them with is Ryan Tannehill, who early on this season, I have a ton of Ryan Tannehill because he's going like the early double-digit rounds, which is ridiculous, right? Now he's probably going in the 9th, 10th rounds, so it's a little bit more expensive. So depending on how you construct your roster, you might not be able to get him. But other affordable stacks that are pretty cheap are the New York Giants stacks. So you can get Daniel Jones in the mid double-digit rounds, and you get Kenny Golladay, who's super cheap in like the 5th or 6th round. And you can get Evan Ingram, who I think is a pretty good late round tight end target, again in the double digit, like maybe like 12th to 13th rounds there. So a couple guys that have high TD upside, and also you can get Sterling Shepard, who's always undervalued. One of my favorite best ball wide receivers, because like people think about best ball and they just think like, oh, I want the guy, like I want the McCole Hardman who gets like 2-3 targets a game and he can potentially go off for one for a touchdown. That's not exactly what I'm going for. I'm looking for guys that actually have a chance to hit like 7-8 targets a game, right, in any given game, not like average over the season. And if you look at Sterling Shepard's history, he absolutely can do that. Him, Jamison Crowder, both going like super, super late in drafts. And those are guys that can have a couple 3 or 4 blow-up games where they get like 8 targets. And that's really all you need for best ball. You're going to chase that type of volume to hopefully they can fill in the flex weeks when your stud wide receivers are not exactly performing, right? So that's another stack I really like. And then the last stack that I've been a huge fan of is the Pittsburgh Steelers stack. So tweeted out a couple weeks ago about Pittsburgh Steelers, and what I like to look at for strength of schedule in any given season is I like to look at what is the opposing offense's strength of schedule, like what is the opposing team's strength in terms of passing efficiency. Are they a very high passing efficiency team? I want that. And then I look at what is their defense like. Do they have a bad defense? That is the perfect marriage of two things for a high scoring fantasy season, because if you think about it, if they have a very efficient scoring offense, like the Chiefs, for example, they're going to score on the Steelers, right? Even though the Steelers have a good defense, whatever, it doesn't matter. They're going to score on them. And then it's going to allow the Steelers to play catch up because they don't have a defense to actually defend against the Steelers. So a lot of people are down the Steelers and Big Ben. I mean, I don't think Big Ben is exactly what he used to be, but I do think that combination, Steelers have one of the toughest passing efficiency against schedules, but they have one of the easiest defensive schedules. So to me, I really like the Pittsburgh Steelers stack. You can get Big Ben for dirt cheap, and you can stack Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, or Juju Smith-Schuster. I've been getting a lot of Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool because Deontay you can get in like the 5th, Chase Claypool you get in the 6th. If I miss on Deontay, you can get Chase Claypool in the 6th and then Juju in a couple rounds later. So there's a lot of options there for you to stack that offense at a very, very affordable price and still chase that upside. And, you know, Chase Claypool obviously has the monster TD upside as well. I haven't been getting much Najee because he's been pretty expensive going in the top part of that second round. In that, if I'm picking from the back part of the draft, I'm usually, like I said, going 0 RB and not really getting too much running backs there. So I've been getting much Najee, but I think between Juju Smith-Schuster, Deontay Johnson, and Claypool, you're going to have enough targets, enough TD upside with Big Ben later to kind of rock it. So those are the main stacks that I've been going after and targeting. Some other possible stacks you can go for is like maybe Matt Ryan, but Calvin Ridley's cost been getting really high. Kyle Pitts' cost, as you know, even in redraft, is pretty damn high. So that's been a bit tougher to get. Another maybe low-key one that I've been looking at, and this is because I've been targeting George Kittle, is George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk. I love Brandon Ayuk in Dynasty, but I also really love him in redraft. So I think that's a really decent pairing, and you can pair them with the quarterbacks for cheap. But again, this is more of a strategy where you're trying to fire on late round quarterbacks and get like 3 of them, because you don't really want a case where you go like Russell Wilson and then Trey Lance is your only other quarterback. 'Cause you don't know exactly when Trey Lance is going to start, and you definitely don't want to draft both like Trey Lance and Jimmy Garoppolo. You just want to take a shot on one of them. So for me, I think that's another one. And Debo is in that mix as well because Debo is also really affordable. So those are the main stacks that I've been targeting. I'm sure there's more out there. Others have looked at it. I mean, you could probably do a stack with some of these other guys. But for me, those are the main guys that I've been going after. And I already talked about the reason why you need to go after them. So that's kind of like basically sums up my redraft like best ball draft strategy. Like there's just general principles I follow, and then as I'm in the draft, I just like pivot and go as I please. And like I said, I'm doing a bunch of slow drafts. I'm doing like 30-40 slow drafts at a time, so it's pretty fun. I mean, if you guys like that stuff, check it out. Go on Underdogs, use code BDGE if you never used it before. You know, we have a partnership with them, so you'll probably get like some free deposits. I don't know exactly what the terms are. Nick probably killed me because I didn't friggin' remember that, but definitely do that and go through BDG. Most of you guys that are watching me probably are already on Underdogs. I know a lot of the Patreons are already on there. That's why they're asking me for like the video content here. So that's kind of where I'm at there with the best ball stuff. The next thing I want to talk about is there was a really, really cool Twitter thread that was put out by the great Adam Harstad. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. But basically, he says Heuristics are simple rules of thumb to help quickly and efficiently make good decisions in complex environments. I often say I'm team heuristics instead of team projections. Projections attempt to quantify the complexity, whereas heuristics attempt to simplify the complexity. I am very, very much team heuristics. Like, I don't do projections because I think it's just like a very, very random game. We're trying to put a lot of false precision on something that we don't know. Now, I a ton of respect for people that do projections because I know there's people out there doing it that are doing it better than me, so I can just kind of look at theirs and use that as a guiding principle. But for me, the way I approach the game is very like just simple rule-based, simple guidelines, mantras, whatever you want to call them. It's what I've been telling all the Patreon members, this entire channel that I started, this entire show, Market Watch Mondays, is based on these simple mantras that I follow in Dynasty. Right. And the reason why I found this thread so interesting is because he just like put in a very simple and, easy to understand manner. And I agreed with a lot of them. So I kind of want to go over some of them. I retweeted them. I had a lot of questions in the Twitter comments. I had some questions on the Patreon about what some of them meant. So I felt like I could take some time to just go over each of them. And, we'll throw them up on the screen as I go. The editor, our homie Sexy Pats, will probably do that for you guys. But I'll just kind of read them through as well for those of you that are not watching the show and actually listening on podcast. All right. So here's one. All right. The go-to example that everyone knows: draft for talent, trade for need. Right. And that's a pretty simple one. It's a simple one, and yet I see everyone like not following it in startup drafts. And in startup drafts right now, like the definition, the prime example of this is people drafting quarterback, reaching up and drafting very suspect quarterbacks because they're like, wow, I really, really need a quarterback. Right. For me, I don't really care, right? It's like it's June. Like I have so many months to trade that it doesn't really matter to me. Like I'm not going to reach for running back or reach for a tight end or reach for whatever just because I'm like, oh my God, like I'm not going to be able to get him because I think, the way to think about it is this, right? Like if someone has a surplus of quarterbacks, it probably means they have a deficiency in running backs. Like when you're playing in leagues that are deep, like everyone has holes. So you're going to be able to trade and fill those holes as needed because at the end of the day, everyone's going to try and win. So like holding 6 quarterbacks doesn't help anybody win. Here's another one that he says, his corollary said, no one has needs in June. And this one I really like. Like I've said it on Twitter many times. As I've been going through these startup drafts, people keep telling me like, oh, you got to draft quarterback, you got to draft quarterback. I'm like, dude, I don't fucking care. It's June. You don't have any needs in June, right? There's no need to draft players for need in June because there's 2 to 3 months for you to trade. The only thing that I'm concerned about with June is, am I drafting players that will accrue value or lose value between now and August? Because if the players I draft accrue value more than the players other people draft, I'm always going to be able to trade for profit to fill the needs that I have to on my team, right? So that's one I really, really like that Adam put out, and one that I live by, and I've been living by this entire startup draft. I've done some draft with 0 QB. I've done some drafts with multiple QBs. It's just I'm just trying to be water and letting the draft fall to me, and that's something that you guys need to do. And that brings me to another point. Like maybe the best heuristic is just be water. Not even 6 words. 2 words, just be water. Be flexible, right? All these fancy terms, 0 RB, modified RB, robust RB, whatever, none of that shit matters to me. Like all I'm trying to do is draft good players at value, right? And if you do that more often than not, you're going to come out ahead. So that's another one for you, not in the thread. This is another one here by @ZWK Football in his thread. It says, prospects have no position. Basically, another way to say draft for talent, trade for need. Adam said, I might amend it to prospect is its own position. But this is a really interesting way to think about drafting prospects or contextualizing your rookie picks, right? Your rookie 1.01 is not a quarterback or a running back. It's very flexible. It's whatever it is. Like, and a lot of prospects that are coming in, like, we don't know what they're going to be yet. So I think that's how like I kind of interpret it. That one might be a little bit more loose for interpretation, but I think his parallel of draft for talent, trade for need really kind of comes into play here. Because again, you're not going into rookie draft being like, yeah, like QB is this pick. Like 1.08, that's going to be a running back. Or 1.07, that's going to be a quarterback. It's a prospect, and whoever falls value there is who you're going to take. So that's another good one. I have other heuristics I think are good, but need some workshopping. So this one's a little bit longer. It says, be willing to trade any non-core asset for future firsts. I really actually like this one, and it's something that I implement in all my dynasty leagues. Like if I'm rebuilding, especially, like any player is available at all times, right? But if I'm contending, there's a couple core pieces that I really need to win. So like, if I have a Patrick Mahomes or Kyler Murray or whatever, like that I'm not really willing to go, but like any other piece I'm willing to trade for first. And the reason why, which we'll learn from another heuristic down below, is firsts are really, really flexible. So you should always be willing to acquire more rookie first, because those are the things that accrue value the most between now and next season. But don't get attached to players, like any single player, and not be willing to trade them for first because you're thinking like, oh my God, like I'm going to lose out on wide receiver. I'm going to lose out on depth, because you can always flip back from the rookie into depth, into wide receiver, into running back, right? But going the other way is going to be very hard, because the later you get in the season, it's going to be more of a clear picture of who's a contender, who's not a contender, right? So, people, your pool of players to trade with is going to be very limited, but everyone is always going to want rookie picks, no matter what. It is the most liquid asset. So don't be afraid to trade your non-core assets. And I'm always willing to trade non-core assets. I'm personally willing to trade like any asset, but to the most extreme end. But more often than not, if you're more in the middle of the road, thinking middle of the road, I'm always willing to kind of trade non-core assets away for future rookie picks. Another one from Adam. This one is buy injured. It's probably the simplest heuristic and the first one I was known for. Again, the underlying concept has nuance, is really more like buy injured players when offered a disproportionate discount to do so. But that's obviously a little bit longer. And this, Saquon Barkley, the best example of this last season was Saquon Barkley. People were trading Saquon Barkley for, Josh Jacobs. People were trading Saquon Barkley for other players that I don't think have the same amount of value, and it was just an injury discount, right? So, and the only time you can implement this, obviously, is if you're not you're not a top competing team. But when you're a productive struggle, right, or when you're in a rebuild mode, when you only care about value, this is a very, very good and profitable move to make by trading healthy players for risky players who, if they were healthy, would be very similar in value, but because one is injured, you can acquire from cheaper, right? So that's a pretty simple thing. Saquon Barkley last year was the best example, but Courtland Sutton was another one that I went after a ton of. I want to get Courtland Sutton everywhere because he was injured, but I thought he was a really damn good player, right? So those are examples of that going forward. And then another one, this one I've seen from Adam, and it's chase value, not wins. And it's a more complicated one to dissect because, I've tweeted out many memes all the time, like don't be afraid to lose a trade if it means you're going to win. But that's really when you're a top end contender, right? But everything in between, whether you're a productive struggle, rebuild, and building yourself up to the contender, you should really be chasing value, because the more value you accrue on your team over time, the better players you have, the more profits you flip for, the better your team is going to be, and that better team should lead you to more wins, right? So chasing value leads you to wins, but there becomes a point at a certain point where you need to stop worrying about value and kind of go all in and push your chips in. And I've done that in a lot of times where I'm flipping the script from rebuild to contender. My team is freaking studly, and I want to add one big asset to really push me over the top. At that point, I think it's fine to give a little bit of value to kind of chase the wins, because that's what you're doing. You're chasing championships, right? You're not just chasing a win, you're chasing a championship. So to me, I agree with that for the most part. The only exception is once you kind of get to that tail end, you kind of need to make that push. Don't be afraid to go for the W in the championship and paying up a little bit more than you're used to get that. And the reason why you're able to do that is because hopefully you would have accrued so much value along the way that it's okay to give up a little bit of value to kind of push you over the top. That's kind of how I think about it. Another one here, never sell liquidity for fair value. I absolutely love this one as well. And it really comes into play when you have rookie first round picks. The reason why you don't want to sell liquidity for fair value is because you're basically giving away a free option value on your team. And what I mean by that is when you sell a rookie first, right, and for a player, that player will never be as liquid as a rookie first, because a rookie first could be anything. Cue up the Family Guy meme of, it could be a bow, it could be anything, but that's really what comes into play. A rookie first round pick could be whatever that person wants that pick to be. But as soon as you trade that pick for a player, now your market is constrained because your only trade partners are other people that like that player, right? And also that player carries a lot more risk because if the player flops, whatever, etc. So you're really giving up a lot of liquidity there. And if you're giving up liquidity, right, you should not be giving up liquidity for free. You should always be charging a premium. So that's why you should always be charging a premium when selling rookie picks, because it gives you liquidity and it gives you option value. So that's one that I really like, and that's one that I've followed ever since I started playing Dynasty. And then another one, situation changes faster than talent. I mean, we hear people say it all the time, trust in talent, buy in talent. Don't trust in don't draft for situation, buy in the talent of a player. And then the fantasy season comes, everyone's like, oh my God, this situation sucks. This player stinks. The biggest example of that for me right now is Rashad Bateman, right? Rashad Bateman was widely assumed by most people as like a top 3 prospect in this class, top 3 wide receiver. Some people had him 1. Noah had him 1, I remember. I had him as 2. And a draft came around, and he got drafted by Baltimore in the first round, which is a positive to me. Everyone's like, no, he sucks. Like, we're out of him now. Now he's like wide receiver 5, 6. We're going to take him in the second round. We're going to draft, all these guys ahead of him. And it doesn't make sense to me because situation changes. I get that the Baltimore Ravens are the best running team in the NFL, right? And they have been for 2 years running. But I think it's very, very risky to assume they're going to carry that forward for next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, right? Will Greg Roman even be there next year? I don't know. The situations in NFL front office and teams change so quickly, right? It's hard to account for that. So I try not to account for it too much. But if you have a talented player, the talent does not change, right? So that's why you want to invest more often than not in talent than the talent of a player than the situation. The couple times where I think it's a bit more exception to the rule is maybe at running back. At running back and quarterback is more where I'm willing to bend the rules a little bit and still not weigh it over talent, but bring in situation a little bit more because those are situations that are much more conducive to fantasy production. Like a running back is completely reliant on the O-line. Quarterback, again, reliant on the O-line, reliant on the team, reliant on his weapons, right? So I think that's where it's more fair to think about it a bit more. But overall, the arching theme should still be in the back of your mind that situations change very, very quickly. And people bring up the A.J. Brown example all the time because it's a fair one, right? Like we didn't know that Ryan Tannehill would be really good. We didn't know that people thought A.J. Brown was a really good prospect, but they knocked him down so far because he landed on what was perceived to be a very low passing volume offense with a very, very bad quarterback, right? And then, shit happens. Things change. And is that going to change for the Baltimore Ravens? No, because Lamar Jackson is probably the stable quarterback, going to be there forever, even though people like to hate on him. But could they shift from a literally bottom of the barrel passing offense to a slightly below average or move towards the average? I think I can absolutely see that coming. So again, remember the situations are always changing. So try your best, especially at the receiving position, wide receiver, to bet on the talent because that's going to win out more often than not. All right. Another one here. Nothing's as dangerous as a plausible story. Anything that explains everything explains nothing. I mean, this is probably more of a heuristic for just Twitter. I mean, we always want to see what we want to see. So it's kind of important to take a little bit of a step back and not create these narratives and excuses for players. Sometimes like shit happens because it happens, right? Like we will always want to say like, well, this guy did bad because of XYZ. Or this guy did really well because of XYZ. Like it's really tough to do that. Like I got into a lot of debates with people because they're like, I relate Chase Claypool. They're like, oh well, if Chase Claypool didn't have that monster game, then he would have been wide receiver shitty. It's like, yeah, okay, if you take all the good players, good games of a player, good plays of a player, you're left with the bad ones, and that's a little bit extreme. Obviously, you can find context in the middle, but it's very, very, I think, dangerous to kind of start going down all these plausible stories because like we can think of any reason, we can make up any reason we want because we want to see what we want to see. We want to see the guys we like succeed, and nobody's immune to that, including myself, right? Everyone needs to keep this in mind because it's very dangerous and it's a very dangerous game to play. And the one that I think really comes to mind is like Darrell Henderson, right? Like people always say like, oh well, Darrell Henderson was really good when Cam Akers got injured and then he got hurt towards the back half of the last year, so we don't really know what he would have done. It's like, yeah, we do know what he would have done because when they were both healthy, Darrell Henderson was a non-factor, and people like to ignore this, but Cam Akers was also hurt. He was hurt beginning of the season. He was hurt later in the season. He got a high ankle sprain, but then he came back, and when he came back and they were both playing, like, what happened? He saw the field, and Darrell Henderson didn't. So it's very easy to create plausible stories, but sometimes it's just as simple as looking at what is, and what is a lot simpler to wrap my head around. So that's kind of what I go off of, and he's got a lot more here from some other people. So from Mr. Pete Griff, buy picks during the season, sell during the draft. This is a pretty simple one. I mean, I talk about it all the time. I'm always talking about how rookie picks are undervalued in the season. I'm always trying to acquire rookie picks in the startup, in the season, because I know they're going to accrue value. They're the safest assets around. But as you guys know, I always also preach to not blow all your picks on rookies. If I go into rookie pick with six first-round picks, I'm very, very rarely drafting 6 players. I'm often trading out into future classes, or I'm trading them for veterans. And the reason why you want to do this is because you take advantage of the dynasty calendar, which is how veterans and rookie picks are valued relative to each other in the season versus during the draft, right? And then this one is mine. So from me, I responded to him. He decided to include this. It's pretty nice of him. But I said, don't sell your rookie picks as late first. I see it all the time. People go in the trade chat. They're like, hey, should I give up my late first and this player for, XYZ? And you don't want to do that, because what you're doing is taking on all of the downside risk on yourself, especially if you're doing this now before the season's already started. If it's like week 10, week 12, like there's maybe more of a case for that. But before the season started, man, you got to have like some balls of steel to be like, yeah, my pick's going to be a bottom 3 pick, because you don't know what's going to happen. Injuries can happen. Players can bust. This is a fucking very, very randomized game, right? And we do not have as much control as people like to think. So to me, you never want to sell as a late first, because what happens is if your team stinks, if a player gets injured, then it becomes a mid first. If a couple big players get injured, it becomes an early first. And you just gave up that option value to someone else for free. And just like liquidity, you do not want to give up option value to someone else for free without charging for it. So a good rule of thumb to do there is just basically make sure you're always charging a premium for your rookie picks. Even if you think it's a late first, just trade it as if it's a mid first, right? Do not fall for the trap of trading for a late first, because it just doesn't make any sense. You're taking on risk willingly for someone else while passing off value to someone else willingly as well for free. And that's just not a place you ever want to be in, all right? And then another one from from the great Peter Howdy: trade depth, target stars. So this one's a little bit tricky. I mean, I think back in the day, we had another heuristic, which is like, if you're coming out of the trade with the best player, you're always winning. I don't really think that's the case anymore. Dynasty players are getting a little bit more sharper. League starting roster is getting a little bit deeper, so you need more starting players on your roster. So a team with fully concentrated risk is not necessarily the right approach to go. But if you can trade like a couple depth, when I interpret it, when he says depth pieces, those aren't like stars, right? Those aren't like, that's not like acquiring depth via trade back in the 5th and 6th round and still drafting really good players. Those are like guys on the back part of your rosters. Anytime you consolidate that into like a better player, it's usually a good idea. But I don't want you to misinterpret this as like trade away all your depth and have very concentrated risk. Because when that happens, you trade away all your depth and all you have is a stud starting roster. Sure, it looks nice, right? But then you're just like 1 or 2 injuries away from being absolutely screwed. And I really, really hate that. I like to have a decent amount of starting caliber players that run deep on my bench, even though I might not be getting the points. But it gives me it gives me a lot more flexibility, and it gives me a lot more margin for error, right? It doesn't. If I have only the starting lineup locked up and then nothing but waiver wire and like fodder, right? What's going to happen is if I get an injury, it forces my hand into trading out all those studs, right? I have no flexibility. But if I have a pretty good starting lineup, not as good as like fully studded, but still some pretty good players on my bench and depth pieces, I can fill those players in and react much more naturally to injuries and the randomness of the game, right? So that's another one, Peter Howdy. I'm not going to go through all of them per se. I think I'm just going to share a couple more here that I think I really like. And one that I really like is the range of outcomes is bigger than you think. And this is probably one of my favorites as well. Like, this is a very, very random game we play. And naturally, we love to attribute successes to our own profiting, like our own insight and our own, projections, and then distribute negative outcomes to like, oh, like that's random or whatever, right? That is a very cognitive bias that everyone has. So for me, like, I always try and think about it in terms of range of outcomes. You don't want to be too absolute and say like, oh, this player sucks, this player has no chance. There's some instances of that, but like for the most part, there's a range of outcomes that can happen for any given player. And understanding the range of outcomes, not just for players, but understanding the range of outcomes for your teams as a whole, like I said, which is why I value flexibility, is very, very important. So do not discount randomness. Do not discount how freaking wild this game is that we play by just being very certain and making moves based on that certainty. That is like one of the worst things you can do, and be like, yeah, I'm absolutely positive this was gonna happen before the season's already started, and start making a bunch of moves in order to fill those needs. All right, so another one here. This is probably the last one I'll talk about. It's from It Is Benjo FF. Work backwards from next year. I actually really like that because, especially when I'm in a productive struggle or rebuild, I'm always looking like 2 years ahead, 1 to 2 years ahead. And I'm not trying to like project players exactly 2 to 3 years ahead, but I'm trying to project my situation, right? Like, so if I'm in a rebuild in a startup and I'm like, okay, well, I think I'm going to be able to compete in this year, then it helps me really frame my trades and the way I think and approach building my team to basically meet that goal. right? So in a lot of startups I'm doing this year, if I'm doing Productive Struggle, I'm targeting 2023 as my flip a switch and contend year. Why? Because I think there's a lot of stud running backs here. And what does that mean for me? It means that, well, in startups, I don't feel as, differentiated between a 2022 first and a 2023 first. If anything, I might even prefer a 2023 first over a 2022 first because it delays those points off my team, it delays the decision, and it accrues that value even more. And for the most part, most people are going to value a 2022 first more than a 2023 first because that one comes first. And it makes sense. Time value of money, right? You can get the production of the players. But knowing that decision and working backwards allows me the flexibility to get more value in my trades in the startup by trading back and acquiring 2023 first for cheaper than I could have acquired 2022 first. So that's just another practical example of how to put some of these heuristics into play. All right. So that's all I got for you guys. I'm not going to read all of them, but again, I will post the Twitter thread into the comments so you guys can go through it yourself. And then, Sexy Pats will throw up the tweets that I did talk about as I'm talking about them, hopefully, so that you guys can kind of follow along there. But like I said, I think this is a really, really good thread and does a really good job of outlining some of the core principles of how I approach the game, right? And I think this is the best approach. This is the best way to approach the game versus a very detailed projections-based approach. But I'm not saying the other side doesn't work either, right? There's more than one way to win the game. This is just what works for me. It's simple. It's very easy to follow, and just having these types of simple rules in place has allowed me to find a lot of great success in the game. So hopefully that's helpful for you guys. That's all I got for you guys this week. Hopefully you guys enjoy the best ball strategy. Hopefully you guys enjoy the simple rules to follow in Dynasty. If you did enjoy, make sure you hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification so you know when we're dropping hot videos like this in the future. And again, if you're interested in really digging deep in Dynasty and bettering yourself as a Dynasty gamer, not just a player evaluator, but a Dynasty gamer, and building true dynasties to dominate your leagues, with your home leagues, with your work leagues, whatever, hop in the Patreon. Hop in the Wolfpack Patreon, patreon.com/ourpack. I promise you, you will not regret it. I'm working night and day in there, talking to people, working on the product, working on my rankings. All that stuff is in there. Again, and then if you want the guide as well, make sure you sign up for the BDG draft guide at bdg.store. That's going to have my simple NFL rankings in there. It's going to have a lot of write-ups from Nick, Noah, and myself, and it's going to be a constantly live updated document. So these are the two things that we're offering you guys to hopefully really, really boost your game on the and to another level, and kind of just bring back those championships and get you that bread, man, because that's what I'm all about. All right, that's all I got for you guys. Until next time, peace out.